Hello, welcome back to yet another session on the Merit Shine channel, and we're looking at an interesting topic today. So the context is that we're talking about one of the, or arguably the biggest lender of the Indian markets, but more importantly, it's not just a lender, it's into multiple things. It has affiliates, it has subsidiaries, be it insurance, be it mutual funds, be it credit cards, be it capital markets, and it's present everywhere, right? So I'm talking about State Bank of India, and because of this massive presence, it also has a lot of things going on continuously within the different angles with this, be it your subsidiaries, be it your affiliates, and something or the other keeps happening in the SBI. So the context is you need to be up on your toes in terms of being aware of what's happening in the context of SBI as well. And this is relevant not just from the perspective of the general awareness and the banking and financial awareness section, but also important in the context of what you may probably get in the interviews as well, wherein obviously you're supposed to be aware of the organization that you're possibly looking or targeting to get into. So while this is more relevant for the SBI PO, but it is equally relevant for IBPS as well, wherein a lot of relevant questions from this could crop up in that exam as well. So right, that's the context for today. We cover State Bank of India in the news, important updates. So what are we waiting for? Let's jump right in. All right, so let's start off with the first piece of news that I wanted to cover from this perspective. So all of you would have been aware that in December 2020, the RBI had basically barred HDFC Bank from issuing any new cards till all the glitches on their portal were resolved. And recently, RBI had once again allowed them to continue their issuance of cards. But in that interim period, when HDFC Bank was not there in the market, and this is as per the August 2021 data, ICICI added significantly the maximum number of cards to the tune of 219,000. And it was closely followed by SBI cards, which was in the second position in terms of the number of cards issued, close to like 1,62,587. And then third position was Axis Bank. So essentially, the beneficiaries of HDFC Bank's lack of presence in the credit card market was basically the benefit to ICICI and definitely to SBI cards as well, which was in the second position in that context. Right, let's move on to the next news. So TCS essentially has been a partner to SBI in a lot of the finance related IT infrastructure that TCS is providing for SBI. And in that context, TCS as part of a new contract will basically help enhance State Bank of India's application estate, which is a multiple set of applications that can actually be used on the portal itself. And this is around your core banking areas and financial inclusion as well for an additional 5-year period in order to drive innovation and tech solutions. So the tech partner from the context of SBI's application estate, especially around core banking and financial inclusion, continues to be TCS for another 5 years. Now moving on to the next news that I wanted to cover, that's basically in the context of taking the digital India at the high sea. So when I say high sea, you're talking obviously about the oceans and the Navy basically. So the Indian Navy and State Bank of India basically launched something called as the SBI's NAV or Navy e-cash card, basically to onboard India's largest naval aircraft carrier, INS Vikramaditya. And this was done in the presence of CS Sethi, who's the MD of Retail and Digital Banking at SBI, and the Vice Admiral Ravi Kumar, basically Flag Officer Commanding in Chief of the Western Naval Command. So what it essentially does is that is basically an important milestone for your digital payment solutions and SBI's commitment also towards Government of India's vision of a digital India being present obviously, and a conscious shift towards a cashless economy as well. Now the thought process here is that the unique infrastructure that is there at the naval ships kind of prohibits or inhibits traditional payment solutions जो वहाँ पे नहीं हो सकते हैं, right? So particularly when the ship is on the sail और high sea में आपका ship है, वहाँ पे आप obviously connectivity पाते नहीं हो, तो obviously your Navy e-cash card जो है, it has its own dual chip technology which will facilitate both online as well as offline transactions as well. So this is the partnership between the Indian Navy and SBI to basically launch the SBI Navy e-cash card. Right. The next thing I want to basically look at is again an interesting one. So here we're talking about in the month of September 2021, SBI signed an agreement with 3 non-banking financial companies. So NBFC MFIs, your MFIs are basically known as your microfinance institutions. As the name suggests, microfinance का मतलब क्या है कि आप छोटे से छोटे स्तर पर आप lending कर रहे हो या फिर आप borrowings दे रहे हो, ठीक है? So you're talking about microfinance, very small lending institutions, and the idea was to co-lend, right? So idea of co-lending का मतलब क्या है कि you're lending along with someone else. So while there will be one primary NBFC, Along with that, SBI भी अगर join in करता है, तो there are two parties involved now. One is the NBFC, which is the primary lender, and the NBFC in turn is basically getting the sources from SBI. So then the context in this case becomes a co-lending partnership or a co-lending agreement. अब ये किसको lend कर रहे हैं? These are basically your joint liability groups, also known as your JLGs. इसमें generally क्या होता है कि a group of what do you say, individual farmers हो सकते हैं, या these could be household women who are basically managing their individual houses, doing various kinds of business or other kinds of agricultural activities and other things as well. So all of these people come together in a single group, right? So ऐसे multiple groups हो सकते हैं. So they are called as JLGs या joint liability groups. Joint liabilities को इसलिए बोला जाता है because let's say all the 10 of them who are basically part of that group may be borrowing from a particular NBFC or a bank in a co-lending partnership. देन अगर एक बंदा अगर पैसा नहीं देता है तो बाकी 9 बंदे उन पे प्रेशर डाल सकते हैं कि भैया पैसा लौटाओ, क्योंकि अगर तुम नहीं लौटाओगे तो हमारा भी what do you say, credit rating कम हो जाएगा. So this kind of creates a what do you call it as a peer pressure, right? And that is where your joint lending groups can be an excellent way to lend to, let's say, the lower strata of the society, wherein one particular person not basically returning the money or defaulting can actually create a pressure on that person, because the others will also get impacted. So that is where your joint liability groups come into the picture. Now, talking about SBI, which is the country's largest lender, it has basically signed a pact with 3 of these NBFCs. One is your Vedika Credit Capital Limited, VCCL, then Save Microfinance Private Limited, that is SMPL, and Paisalo Digital Limited, which is PDL, and this is for that co-lending partnership that we talked about, to individual members of your joint liability groups. And this is basically for various activities, including agriculture and the allied activities related to agriculture, and also other income generation activities as well. Now, the idea is through these kind of partnerships, SBI would be able to further increase its presence in the rural and the semi-urban areas as well by offering such small ticket loans and through such kind of partnerships. So this is the partnership or the agreement that SBI signed up with 3 of the NBFC MFIs, and this is for a co-lending to basically a joint liability groups. Next up, we're talking about SBI basically also came up with a special kind of a fixed deposit scheme for the senior citizens. And that deposit scheme, which was basically known as V-Care, उसको उन्होंने further extend कर दिया. So this was V-Care senior citizens. The beauty of this term deposit was that अगर आप एक senior citizen हैं and basically अगर आपके पास कोई term deposit आपने रखा है, retail term deposit for 5 years and above, तो उस केस में आपको नॉट ओनली इज दैट सीनियर सिटीजन के हिसाब से आपको 50 बेसिस पॉइंट्स तो एडिशनल वैसे भी मिलता ही है फॉर ऑल योर डिपॉजिट्स दैट यू आर प्लेसिंग विद द बैंक व्हिच इज एसबीआई, बट एडिशनली इन दिस केस वी केयर सीनियर सिटीजंस इट वाज गिविंग यू एन एडिशनल प्रीमियम ऑफ 30 बेसिस पॉइंट्स. So बेसिस पॉइंट का मतलब है, लेट्स से फॉर एग्जांपल आई से दैट द बेस रेट और द बेस इंटरेस्ट रेट बीइंग प्रोवाइडेड बाय SBI for an FD or a term deposit is let's say 5%. Then when I say 50 basis points ज़्यादा, तो मतलब senior citizen रहेंगे तो उनको 5.5% मिलेगा. And with this 30 basis points additional, it means that 5.8% would be the rate that will be offered to them. So that is what basis points refers to. 30 basis points का मतलब technically 0.3%. That's the context, right? So this was basically launched way back in May 2020. Right, but it was again extended till September 2020 earlier. Then again, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has now been decided that this special FD scheme will further be extended till the end of March 2022, which means 31st March 2022 tak. Right, so this is the V-Care senior citizens term deposit. Next up, we're looking at another couple of interesting news. So the first one of them is basically what happened in case of an online payment system launch that was done by the state of Mizoram, and specifically launched by the Transport Minister of Mizoram, P.U.T.J. Lalnantluanga. And this was basically in the state's transport department itself, and the department was involved in this collaboration with NIC, which is your National Informatics Center, and the State Bank of India, in order to make a shift from your physical to your digital payment mode, right? And this system basically was divided into 2 components, which was your Vahan and Sarathi. So Vahan was basically a system which was basically dealing with the new vehicle registration, permits renewal, issuance of a duplicate permit, tax payment, issuance of special permits, fitness renewal fee, ownership transfer fee, issuance of your no objection certificates, your registration renewal, duplicate registration certificate, and so on and so forth. These were the things that were involved in Vahan. And as far as Sarathi was concerned, it had most of the things to do with your licensing, which is basically a platform for submission of applications such as your learner, driving, conductor licenses, or duplicate driving licenses, or in case if there's a change of name, address, or photos, or any kind of license renewal, all this was getting covered in Sarathi. So essentially for Mizoram, it was a tie-up between the Department of Transport with the NIC and the SBI, and the two components were Vahan and Sarathi. So that is basically from that perspective. Next up, we're talking about another interesting development wherein there is an impending IPO that is coming for the LIC, which is expected during the period Jan to March 2022. And in this LIC's IPO, obviously there is a requirement of something called as a merchant banker. A merchant banker क्या है और क्या करता है? Right, so firstly, the merchant banker would have activities which are pertaining to, let's say, promotional activities with regards to the IPO itself. You have to promote that, right? Now, when I say syndication ka matlab a lot of people coming together and doing something, right? So when I say credit syndication, it means that many banks are coming together to provide a loan together. So that becomes a credit syndication. So co-lending में क्या होता है? Co-lending हमने जब देखा आगे, co-lending is basically two entities, right? दो लोग 1+1 अगर आते हैं साथ में, that becomes a co-lending initiative. Syndication is multiple such parties coming together, right? So 1+1 is basically co-lending, and many coming together is syndication. So credit syndication, many of them coming together to provide credit, that is credit syndication. And again, project counseling, कैसे project को लेके जाना है, development कैसे होगा, मतलब IPO कैसे track करेंगे, a lot of those stuff from that perspective, and managing the entire portfolio itself in terms of how the funds are coming and all that, and also providing advice to DIPAM, which is basically the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, in terms of the timing and the floor prices for the IPOs as well. So this is something which has happened. So government has appointed 10 merchant bankers for LIC's IPO. That is to be launched during Jan to March 2022, and 10 isliye chahiye because LIC's IPO is going to be huge. It's going to be massive, right? So scale wise, it is probably the biggest IPO in the history of India. So in that context, it would definitely need that many merchant bankers. So obviously, सबसे पहला कौन है इस list में? SBI Capital Markets definitely होना ही चाहिए था और है भी. So SBI is definitely in the news in that sense, but not SBI directly, but SBI Capital Markets. Then you have Goldman Sachs, then you have Citigroup, Nomura, then you have JM Financial, Axis, Bank of America, then JP Morgan, ICICI SEC, and Kotak Mahindra Capital as well. So these are the 10 merchant bankers who've basically been, appointed to become kind of managing the LIC's IPO that is to be launched next year. Now, apart from that, Government of India has also selected Concept Communications, which is going to be the advertising agency for this, and K Fintech as the registrar and share transfer agent for the IPO in itself. So that's the update as far as the LIC IPO is concerned. So SBI Capital Markets is very much in the news in this case as well. Moving on to the next couple of news here. Moving on to the 8th one. So SBI has again raised 4,000 crores, and this is through the Basel compliant additional tier 1 bonds, and this is at a coupon rate of 7.72%, and this is basically the lowest pricing offered on such debt. Now when I say pricing, इसका pricing का context क्या है? Ultimately आप bonds raise कर रहे हो. Bonds का मतलब क्या है कि bonds will allow you to raise money in the market, but bond essentially क्या है? It's the debt. It's not equity. राइट अगर आप बॉन्ड्स से पैसा रेज कर रहे हो मार्केट से, तो आपको एट द एंड ऑफ द मैच्योरिटी पीरियड आपको प्रिंसिपल अमाउंट वापस करना पड़ेगा, करेक्ट? यू हैव टू रिटर्न द प्रिंसिपल अमाउंट, बट एट द सेम टाइम एट रेगुलर इंटरवल्स which could be half yearly or quarterly or annually depending on the category of the bond. At those intervals you'll also have to make regular interest payments, right? So the context is, when I say the bonds have been issued at a coupon rate of 7.72%, right? So essentially you're saying that this is the lowest pricing ever offered on such debt issued by an Indian bank since the implementation of the Basel III capital rules in 2013. तब से लेके अब तक this is the lowest rate that has been offered. So technically when I say coupon rate of 7.72%, so this is the lowest pricing that has been offered till date. Now talking about a couple of other developments. So this is the first AT1 bond issuance in the domestic market since the implementation of the new SEBI regulations, wherein SEBI had placed certain regulations and guidelines in the month of March and April this year with regards to the maturity of these kind of bonds that was there. So us context mein, after that, this is the first AT1 bond issuance in the domestic market. Second aspect of it, that these are AA plus rating, which is the highest rating in the country for these kind of instruments, especially in the context that their nature is that they are hybrid instruments and they have a high risk nature. So in that context, a AA rating is definitely considered to be a very high in that context. So SBI is basically raising 4,000 crores through Basel compliant 81 bonds as well, right? The next piece of news talks about a partnership that is with BLS International Services. It has been selected as NBC, or the National Business Correspondent for SBI, in order to deliver your banking services in your urban, semi-urban and your rural areas across India. And obviously the idea of a business correspondent is very simple कि ये लोग जो हैं ये बैंक को हर गली नुक्कड़ में पहुंचाते हैं, right? So they have their own agents who are employed to basically work on behalf of the bank and provide banking services in the remotest parts of the country, right? So the idea is very simple, that this is going to boost financial inclusion mission of the government of India and provide banking services to the underserved and the unserved people of the country, right? So essentially what all services will be provided by BLS on behalf of SBI. So savings bank deposits honge, FDs, recurring deposits, remittances, micro pension, micro insurance. So micro pension kyun bolte hain? Because the amount that will be there is very small, right? So इसलिए micro pension, micro insurance, these are insurance and pension, yes, but these are at a small ticket size. That is why they are referred to as micro, right? Similarly, open account with your online KYCs, Aadhaar enabled payment systems, mini statements, passbook printing, so on. And this will be for your SBI account holders across India. Now, development on similar lines is that Starfin India, which is basically a subsidiary of BLS International, has also become the national business correspondent for Bank of Baroda. Just like BLS International Services is the NBC for SBI, Starfin India, which is a subsidiary of BLS International, has become an NBC for Bank of Baroda to support their financial inclusion mission as well. Right, so that's the context in this news. Moving on further, we're looking at a couple of other news in that context. So the 10th one is basically the fact that your CA Rover Holdings, which is a US-based private equity fund, has basically sold 32 million shares, amounting to a 3.4% stake in SBI Cards. And this is valued at $443 million, equivalent to 3,267 crore. Now, CA Rover Holdings is basically part of the Carlyle Group and an affiliate of Carlyle Asia Partners. And prior to this, if you look at it, CA Rover basically had held 61.2 million shares approximately, which is amounting to a 6.5% stake in SBI Card. So essentially 3.4 of that has now been offloaded by CA Rover Holdings, which is part of the Carlyle Group. So talking about SBI Card, was launched in October 1998 by SBI and GE Capital, and the current MD and CEO is Mr. Ram Mohan Rao Amara. Right, so moving on to news number 11. So your BPCL, which is Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, and SBI Card have basically launched something called as the BPCL SBI Card, and it's obviously a co-branded RuPay contactless credit card. So contactless because आपको कहीं पे physically उसको present करने के अलावा उसको actually कार्ड को देने की जरूरत नहीं है, but it is a co-branded card, which means it will have the branding of both BPCL as well as SBI and powered by RuPay, which is obviously one of the technologies provided by NPCI. And this will basically to be enhance the savings of your customers and to provide a boost to the cashless transactions as well. So what it does is that it provides a 1% surcharge का जो waiver है वो इस कार्ड पे मिला जाएगा. So whatever surcharge is being applicable for any kind of purchase of petrol in any of the pumps and so on, that surcharge will be waived off on every transaction up to rupees 4,000, and there's also a 4.25% value back being provided. Now the card holders will also get reward points for fuel purchase at the BPCL petrol pumps and different categories such as grocery, departmental store, etc. A lot of other kind of benefits in these lines will also be there. So that is basically the tie-up between BPCL and SBI Cards to be specific, and this is the co-branded card that they've launched. So the next news is basically the long overdue setup of the IDRCL, which is the India Debt Resolution Company Limited. So the government of India had already established NARCL, which is the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited, and also known as the Bad Bank. And the idea was to set it up in order to clean up the bad loans that are there in the country in the context of your non-performing assets, and carry out all kinds of activities in terms of debt management, operational management, resolution advisory, support and consulting services. So these were additional services that were to be basically provided by a company other than NARCL, because NARCL will purely look at buying up the bad loans or cleaning up the Indian banking system. But उससे related जो support चाहिए वो कौन देगा? उसके लिए ही IDRCL का इस्तेमाल किया जाएगा, which is the India Debt Resolution Company Limited, and it will provide all of these services in relation to debt resolution and also insolvency resolution as well. Now IDRCL was basically set up with a paid capital of rupees 80.5 lakh, and the authorized capital of 50 crores is there. So currently Only 80.5 lakh is the capital that has been paid up. Additionally, it has the capacity to reach an authorized capital of 50 crores, right? Now, we also discussed in one of the earlier sessions that the cabinet also approved the Government of India guarantee of up to rupees 30,600 crore in order to back the security receipts to be issued by NARCL, right? So this is again something that the government has done. So government guarantee would ensure that the banks would be more keen to take up or let's say pass on all the bad loans to an RCL in the hope that the government guarantee will ensure कि कुछ भी credit related problems banks को नहीं आएंगे, right? So that is the context of NARCL, and IDRCL has been created to support NARCL in this entire cleanup of the bad loans initiative by the government of India. Next thing important is that the current shareholders of IDRCL, so it includes your Bank of Baroda, Punjab National Bank, Bank of India, Bank of Maharashtra, and definitely SBI is going to be there, obviously. And then, of course, Union Bank of India, Canara Bank, Indian Bank, and IDBI Bank as well. So, of course, you can't have any of these entities being set up without SBI being there for sure, right? Next up, if you look at the sponsors, then Canara Bank has basically been the primary sponsor in the context that it has the highest equity shares of 120,000 shares, each of rupees 10, followed by 5 banks, which is Bank of Baroda, Punjab National Bank, SBI, Union Bank of India, and Indian Bank, who basically subscribe to 99,000 equity shares each. On the other hand, Bank of India and Bank of Maharashtra have basically subscribed at a lesser level, which is around 50,000 shares each. So the big sponsor is Canara Bank, and followed by the next 5 banks. And of course, in the second category is where your SBI comes into the picture again. Right. So next up, we're talking about the directors of IDRCL. So to start off with, it's going to be Arvind Sadashiv Mokashi, who's been appointed on the board as the SBI's nominee director for this particular entity. Now, the other directors include Narayan Kilvi, the Sheshadri, and Anil Raj Chellan as well. So that's basically news number 12 for you guys. Moving on to news number 13. Again, a very interesting news. If any one of you wants to basically withdraw money from a boat, then you can basically go to the houseboat at Dal Lake in Srinagar, and this is basically an open ATM that has been installed by the SBI for the convenience of your locals and tourists. So this is basically a floating ATM that has basically been launched, and that is fantastic to hear. So the floating ATM is going to be in the popular Dal Lake, and that fulfills a long-standing need and will be an added attraction to the charm of Srinagar. So if you're looking to withdraw cash from a houseboat, then this is something which is definitely interesting for you guys, right? So a floating ATM in the Dal Lake, Srinagar, and launched by one and only SBI. Right, so following up on the next piece of news, on 29th of June 2021, the Government of India announced the 17th tranche of the electoral bonds and said that these will be issued by SBI's 29 authorized branches across the country starting from July 1st to July 10th. Now, technically, these electoral bonds will be valid for a period of 15 calendar days from the date of issue, and no payment shall be made to any payee political party if the electoral bond is deposited after the expiry date of the validity period, which is after the 15 days. Now, the electoral bond deposited by an eligible political party in its account shall be credited on the very same day. So these were electoral bonds. Now, SBI is the only authorized bank to issue such kind of bonds. So that is the context here. So technically SBI को ही authorization मिला हुआ है electoral bonds issue करने के लिए. Now, the important thing to understand is कि electoral bonds हैं क्या? Electoral bonds were basically pitched as an alternative to cash donations. So instead of cash donations made to political parties, जहाँ पे it's very difficult to track and transparency नहीं रहता है. So in order to bring in greater level of transparency in political funding, these electoral bonds were basically brought into the picture, right? And SBI is the only authorized bank to issue such kind of bonds, right? Okay, so moving on to the last piece of news for today. Amit Saxena, who basically is currently SBI's Global Deputy CTO, which is your Chief Technology Officer, he's been appointed as the new Chief Technology Officer of the Reserve Bank of India Innovation Hub, or the RBI Innovation Hub as it is called. So it is RBIH, and this is to basically build an innovation ecosystem for India's banking and financial services industry. Now, what was the context here? So basically the RBIH, or the Reserve Bank Innovation Hub, was established by Reserve Bank of India in 2020, and the idea was to promote innovation across the financial sector with the use of technology, and also to create an environment in order to facilitate and foster greater level of innovation. And the CEO for RBIH is Mr. Rajesh Bansal, and Amit Saxena will basically be taking over as the Chief Technology Officer of RBIH, and he was the SBI Global Deputy CTO. Right, so that brings us to the end of this particular session wherein we looked at State Bank of India in the news. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There's a lot more that's continuously happening. And of course, we will keep revisiting as and when time permits and also cover some of the other news that may be cropping up from this standpoint. But this is what I've had in store for you today. So with that, we come to an end to this particular session, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one with some more interesting concepts and some more interesting news or fundamentals. Until then, this is Ravi signing off. Have a great day and a wonderful week ahead. See you guys.